Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. Future timeline. It was the evening after the first meeting of the Grand Family, when Severus Snape finally allowed himself to relax in his quarters. He was nursing a fire whiskey, and on his left hand was jingling a hidden silver bracelet he hadn't worn until a few hours ago. His thoughts, on the other hand, were elsewhere. "Severus," the voice of his head of house echoed in his mind. "You hand." When Severus had turned and looked at the seemingly younger man, he shuddered. Severus couldn't help it. The man he was interacting with, in Severus's eyes, was quite a lot like Potter. They had the same hair color, even if the man's hair was longer and a lot more tammable than Potter's ever had been. They had a similar face, Potter's just slightly different, but that could be explained away by the glasses. They even had the same eyes, and yet there was the biggest difference between Potter and the man in front of Severus as well. While Potter's eyes were green, the man's eyes were of a different green than Potter's. The man's eyes were lighter, showing knowledge far beyond that of a normal mortal, and yet they were darker as well. Dark thanks to the loss of thousands in the other man's life. So different, and yet so similar, and while Severus hated the Potter boy for his innocent and carefree life, he couldn't do the same for the man in front of him because, unlike Potter, this man wasn't innocent at all. Severus couldn't help but wonder what the man would say if Severus accused him of cold-blooded murder, an accusation that wouldn't be wrong at all, so Severus guessed. When Severus's eyes met the other man's, the seemingly younger one's face turned grave. "Severus," his head repeated, "your hand." And Severus knew exactly why the other man wanted it. He swallowed, then unbuttoned his cuffs to free his left hand. When he held it out to his head, the dark mark was visible for all the occupants of the room to see. He could see the disgust in the eyes of those that had followed Dumbledore just previously to the meeting, and even the neutral ones didn't look too happy seeing it. Severus's new head of house instead simply took his hand and looked at the dark mark without emotions. For a moment, then those unfathomable green eyes met Severus's black. "Are you ready to stop your activities as a spy, or do you want to continue?" Salazar asked him coolly. This time everybody else in the room sucked in a breath in surprise. Severus wasn't sure if it was that good an idea to blurt it out like that in front of everybody here, even if they were now family. His head of house seemed to catch on to Severus's concern, because he waved it off. "This meeting, like everything else previous to the reveal of the family, is shielded in their minds," he said. "They won't be able to talk about it, and nobody will be able to read their thoughts on it until the secrecy spell fails when the family is revealed. Until then, everybody in this room will be trained in occlumency, so you don't have to fear that your secret comes out." Severus nodded curtly. Oddly enough, he actually believed his head's word for it. "I'd like to keep spying, if you please," he forced out instead, forcing himself to be more civil than he normally was. Salazar inclined his head and pulled out a simple silver bracelet from a pocket of his robes. "I thought this might be your answer," he said, unconcerned. "You're far too fixed on atoning for mistakes you made a decade ago." Then the seemingly younger man shook his head. "It's not healthy," he murmured to himself, while he fastened the bracelet around Severus's left arm. Then the grip he had on the opposite side of the dark mark tightened. With his free hand, Salazar started to trace a few runes onto the dark mark. Severus could feel the air around him becoming laden with magic. His skin burned. Then a golden flash surrounded the dark mark at the hissed command of his new head of house, and something ripped apart inside Severus. Searing pain coursed through his body, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. Then the dark mark tingled, burned as if trying to keep its hold of Severus before it flashed out of existence. The next moment, the silver bracelet heated. For a short second, Severus could see a ghost version of the dark mark above the bracelet. Then it also vanished, and the only thing left was a silver bracelet and unblemished skin. Severus took another sip from his drink, staring at his unmarked forearm. He had borne the dark mark for over a decade in shame. To see it actually gone was disconcerting and oddly liberating, but it also made Severus wonder, Albus always said that there was no way to remove the dark mark, he muttered to himself, and yet my head of house removed it within a few minutes. Yes, it made Severus wonder if Albus Dumbledore had even tried to look into it or if he had simply assumed that there was no way. Severus shook his head. The dark mark on his forearm was gone. The dark mark on Lucius's forearm was also gone, and Severus could still spy. With that thought he finished his drink, before he stood up and clad himself in his Death Eater robes. A few minutes later he was at Malfoy Manor, and in front of the Dark Lord. "My lord," he greeted the man while trying to ignore the vampire that was sitting in the candelabra, cackling away. "Severus," the Dark Lord said, his voice clearly annoyed, and Severus made a mental note to avoid any questions that had to do with the insane vampire in the candelabra. He actually didn't want to know what the insane Sanguini had done this time around to annoy the Dark Lord. "I bring news, my lord," Severus said instead. "News?" the Dark Lord asked with narrowed eyes, and Severus nodded. "The old fool Dumbledore told the staff today," he said, and continued immediately when the Dark Lord's eyes narrowed further. "It seems like Lucius and Narcissa were led into a trap. I'm not sure what happened to Narcissa, but according to Dumbledore, Lucius died." The Dark Lord frowned. "It's not like the old fool to kill anybody," he said with narrowed eyes, and Severus shrugged. "Dumbledore didn't seem to be happy about it, so I guessed that it was either an accident or maybe Moody," he replied. This time, understanding could be seen in the Dark Lord's eyes. "Alistair Moody," he said slowly and unhappily. "That man has been trigger-happy since the First War. I'm surprised that the old fool still keeps him around, considering that he actually killed a few of my men back then." Severus shrugged. "It's not as if he has that many people to choose from," Severus pointed out. "Not many believe that you're back after all, my lord." "Too true, Severus," the Dark Lord said, this time sounding satisfied, before his face darkened again. "So Lucius is dead," he repeated, and Severus inclined his head slowly. "According to the old fool, he is," he said with an emotionless voice. "I am displeased with those news," he hissed, and Severus braced himself for a round of Crucio now that the Dark Lord had the most important information. But the Dark Lord simply stood up and paced. "Has the old fool said something about the Malfoy property and monies?" The Dark Lord nodded. "Course," Severus added daringly, "if Narcissa is dead as well, the old fool might still have enough sway in the Wizengamot to get the guardianship of Draco transferred to him until Draco is of age." The Dark Lord contemplated those words for a few minutes, then he nodded. "I will retreat to my house in Little Hangleton until after Christmas," he decided. "You, on the other hand, will ensure that young Draco will take his father's place in the January meeting of the Wizengamot to ensure that he's recognized as a legal adult and lord of his house." Severus inclined his head. "As you wish, my lord," he said. "After that," the Dark Lord added, "you will bring the boy here immediately to receive my mark." "Of course, my lord," Severus agreed stiffly. For a moment, he feared that the Dark Lord would start cursing him now, but then the monster only waved him away, and Severus hastened to leave the room before the Dark Lord threw another temper tantrum. Severus was nearly at the ward line when the vampire caught up to him and stopped him from leaving. Sharp, glinting fangs were revealed when the vampire smiled at him. Then the vampire pulled Severus forward until Severus feared that the creature planned to feed on him. The vampire sniffed. "Ah," Sanguini sighed. "I know that scent." Again, Sanguini flashed his fangs at Severus, and the potion master shuddered. The vampire, seeing the reaction, just patted the professor's cheek as if he was a child. "Don't worry, young one," he said. "I'm not much of a kinslayer." That made Severus nearly choke on nothing. "Oh, child of my brother," he said fondly. "What a delightful creature you are. Don't worry, Uncle will make some time for you in the future to get to know you." Severus's eyes narrowed. "You're not my uncle," he said coolly. The vampire pouted. "There might be a few greats missing in there, but I assure you, I am," he said. "Perta's scent is all over you, clinging to you like a protective cocoon, exactly like it does to me. The only explanation for that is that Perta sees you as family and has taken you under his protection." Severus stared at the insane vampire and then decided that it wasn't worth fighting over with a clearly insane creature like him. Whatever, he said, and tried to free himself from the vampire's grip. I have to go and return to Hogwarts now. The vampire just tightened his hold on Severus. Only if you tell me a proper goodbye, nephew mine, Sanguini pouted. Severus frowned. Then he sneered but said curtly, Goodbye. The vampire admonished him. Goodbye, Uncle Anna, say it. Severus contemplated if St. Mungo's would be too put out with him if he delivered them a clearly mentally ill vampire. In the end, he guessed that trying to drag the creature through the wards and apparate it to St. Mungo's wasn't worth the effort. Goodbye, Uncle Anna, he forced out, and the vampire patted his cheek with an affectionate look again. Good boy, he said. I'm looking forward to see you again. And with that, the vampire let go of him and returned to the manor and the Dark Lord, leaving Severus to wonder if atonement was enough of a motivator to keep spying if he had to deal with Uncle Anna on top of the Dark Lord. Ah, Severus! Albus Dumbledore greeted his spy, and the man sneered at the familiarity the headmaster used to talk to him. Headmaster? He greeted the old man with the twinkling eyes. I guess that you bring news? Dumbledore asked his spy in Voldemort's ranks, and Severus inclined his head. Indeed I do, he said coolly. Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy have vanished. The Dark Lord has no idea what happened, but he suspects that your order has something to do with it. A trap, he called it. Dumbledore frowned. They vanished? Yes, sir, Severus replied. The Dark Lord has no idea what happened to them. They left their manor and haven't been seen since then. The Dark Lord fears that Moody got his hands on them and killed them. The headmaster frowned. How high is the possibility of that? He asked his spy, and Severus shrugged. I have no idea where that insane ex-aura has been for at least the last 2 days, headmaster, he pointed out. It's after all not my duty to babysit the rest of the order on top of spying for you. Of course not, Severus, Dumbledore agreed, but the frown stayed on his face. I will take a look into this. Let's just hope that Aluster hasn't gone and done something irreversible. Of course, headmaster, Severus replied, not bothering to tell the old man that he knew exactly where the Malfoys were and that their vanishing act had indeed nothing to do with Aluster Moody. Anything else important, Severus? The other man shook his head. No, sir, he said. The Dark Lord hasn't said anything about further plans or anything else. Albus Dumbledore stroked his beard, then he nodded. Then I will leave you to your duties, my boy, he said jovially, and the potions master bowed stiffly and left the headmaster's office to return to his quarters. I wonder how the headmaster will react when he finds out that the Malfoys are indeed still alive, and now following somebody else, he mumbled, before shaking his head and deciding to use the rest of his evening to have another drink. Being a double spy was hard work, but it was even harder to lie to both masters evenly. Guess that makes me a triple spy or whatever, Severus thought, sneering. Just that this time around I actually don't have a master but do it on my own violation. But then, that was the least thing Severus could do to keep his new family safe, and he was sure that unlike his masters, his family would actually appreciate his decisions. With that thought, Severus wrote the Malfoys a message that their disappearance was explained before sitting down to have another drink to finish up his day. Aluster Mad-Eye Moody, meanwhile, stood in front of the Order of the Phoenix's headquarters, staring at the old and dreary-looking house. He hesitated. Thanks to his data, he knew that the only one inside headquarters was currently one Sirius Black. The man, even with being free now, was still living in the old house of his parents. Black had wanted to move out the moment it was known that he was innocent, but Albus Dumbledore had objected to the idea and had persuaded the last Black to continue living within headquarters for the time being, citing that he needed someone who was always there to help those who came by unexpectedly. Black hadn't been happy, but in the end gave in to the headmaster's demands. Now, Aluster Moody was standing in front of the dreary house, daring not to enter, as if he was an unruly child, returning home after breaking the rules of their parents. You won't get answers otherwise, Moody remembered himself. While he had contacted the head of House Delacour to speak to his uncle, he had been told that the old man was currently somewhere in Germany and unavailable. Alastor would have to either wait some time or try to find out the true story of his father's death from somewhere else. So Moody had come to Black to ask for the journals of Black's ancestors, just to stand outside the house in the rain, not daring to enter and confront Black with the idea of wanting to look into anything that belonged to Black's family. Black hated his family. Moody had seen how careless the man had acted when it came to his inheritance, and he had seen the man sneer the moment any family members of himself had come up. Moody guessed that he would have a fight at hand the moment he told Black that he wanted to take a look into the journals of one of his forebear. Moody hesitated for another moment, then he took a deep breath and forced himself to enter the old and shabby-looking house. He stomped through the hallway and entered the kitchen. Like he expected, Black was sitting at his kitchen table, staring unhappily into a glass of fire whiskey that stood in front of him on the table. Moody slammed the door shut behind him and Black looked up from his drink, his eyes bloodshot and his face drawn with unhappiness. "Moody," he greeted the old Auror. "What are you doing here?" Moody frowned at the other man. "I came here to talk to you, Black," he said truthfully, and the other man stared at him blankly. "Talk to me?" he asked, sounding a bit confused. "About what?" Moody hesitated for another second, then he forced himself to speak up. "About your family," he said, and Black's face darkened into a grimace immediately. "Truly, Moody," he said unhappily, "do you have to destroy my peaceful evening with a question like that?" Moody just stared at the other man. "Doesn't matter if you like it or not, Black," he said gruffly. "I need answers, and your family can provide them, so I will take a look into your family history." Black shrugged disinterestedly. "Whatever," he said, and stared at his glass. "What do you want to know? But keep in mind that I ran away from home after not bearing their bigotry anymore when I was 15. "I'm quite aware of that, Black," Moody replied while frowning at the man in front of him. "The Black family at the time of Grindelwald. What do you know about them?" he asked. This time Black actually looked up to stare at Moody incredulously. "We're currently in war with a dark wizard, and you want to talk about the defeat of another dark wizard ages ago?" he asked in disbelief. Moody just returned his stare with hard eyes. "I need to know, Black," he said. "Doesn't matter if it makes sense to you or not. I need to know, so tell me." Black just shrugged. "I've actually no idea what my family has to do with Grindelwald," he said uninterestedly. "I never knew that they had anything at all to do with the war back then." Moody frowned. "They were part of the war," he said with conviction. "Your grandfather, Arcturus Black, actually came to my home when I was 10 years old to talk to my mother about my fallen father." This time there was clear disbelief in Black's face for all to see. "What did my grandfather have to do with the death of your father?" he asked before thinking about it and raising a hand to stop Moody from answering. "Forget my question," Black said, a sneer now on his face. "From what I know about my family, I can actually guess what he had to do with his death. My family is known for dark magic and joining dark lords after all." The sneer grew even more pronounced at those words, and Moody frowned. "I'm sorry. He died protecting me while I was trying to get my cousin to safety." The tired voice of a dirty and grim man in rags echoed through Moody's mind, a voice he remembered from when he was 10. It had been the worst day in his life back then, and yet it had shown him exactly what a man his father had been. "We had planned ahead, but there were complications." "I think, Black," Moody said slowly, "you might have the wrong impression of your grandfather." Black frowned at that, and Moody elaborated. Black opened his mouth then closed it with a snap, disbelief still evident in his eyes. What do you mean, your father died protecting my grandfather?" he finally asked Moody, confusion in his eyes. Moody shrugged. "I'm not sure," he said. "That's the only thing I know. Well, that and that the Malfours were also somehow involved in everything. I don't understand it, but I need to find out, especially if Albus lied to me and the whole thing with Grindelwald didn't happen at all. How he told it the rest of Britain." "Why?" he asked. Moody frowned. "Why, what?" he replied, and Black returned his gaze evenly. "Why does it matter?" he asked. "It's not as if it's important right now." Moody thought about it. Black nodded slowly. "I'm not too happy with Dumbledore," he said truthfully to Moody. But who else should I work with if not him? It's not as if the Ministry is fighting Voldemort. For a second, Moody said nothing. Potter, he finally decided. If Albus isn't who he portrays to be, then I will follow Potter. The boy is far more grown up than I ever thought, and unlike Albus, he at least is known for giving us something akin to peace for the last 10 years. Black looked at him in surprise. Harry? He repeated, a bit thrown by Moody's words. Harry's not working with Dumbledore anymore? Moody snorted. The boy does everything but work with Albus, he said, amused, and from what I found out he hasn't worked with Albus for quite some time already, if ever. Black frowned. But why? He asked, clearly confused by Moody's assessment. Moody just shrugged. I have actually no idea, he said truthfully, but from how it sounded like, Potter's decision was definitely influenced by whatever happened with Grindelwald. In other words, if I want to know my godson's reason, I'll swallow my hate for everything to do with my family and research what happened back then between my grandfather, your father, Dumbledore, and Grindelwald. Black concluded with a grimace. Moody showed him his teeth in a semblance of a smile. Exactly, Black, he said. And now tell me if there's a way to find out what exactly your family was doing back then in the fight against Grindelwald. Black groaned. I hate research, he said. Why does it have to be my family involved in the whole debacle? I hate my family. Moody was sure they would find some evidence if they looked just long enough for it. Harry, Hermione said hesitatingly after their current dear meeting. They had been learning shield charms, including one that reflected back the curses thrown at their opponent. Even if it was quite effective in theory, it was also clear that the shield was able to kill the people they were fighting if the curse thrown at the shield was deadly. Harry looked up from where he was documenting the advances of the members of the DA. Yes, Hermione? He asked pleasantly. Hermione frowned at her best friend. Do you truly think it a good idea to teach us a shield like the last one you showed us? She asked him nervously. Yeah, he said. What if the Slytherins use it against one of us or when they're joining Voldemort? Harry sighed and sat down his quill. If Ron, he corrected, and his friend frowned, so Harry elaborated. If they join Voldemort, not when, Ron. Ron snorted. They're Slytherins, Harry, he said with a throwaway gesture. It's just a matter of time until they join him. They're children, Ron, he said tiredly, some of them not older than 11. You don't want to tell me that even those little children are evil, do you? Ron frowned. Malfoy was, he pointed out, and Harry rolled his eyes. Malfoy was immature and a bit of a bully. He was not evil, he corrected his former best friend. Ron stared at Harry. That's what you say, mate, he said and shook his head. I think he's definitely evil. That was the moment Hermione spoke up again. It doesn't matter if Malfoy's evil or not, she said. That shield and its consequences is far more important. She was interrupted by another voice before she could finish her demand. You shouldn't criticize the prince, a dreamy voice told her softly. He has known what to do for hundreds of years already. He has a lot more experience than we all together. So if he thinks that spell is necessary, it is necessary. Don't you think so too? Hermione turned to the owner of the dreamy voice, who was standing behind her. The girl had light blonde hair and dreamy silver eyes as well. She had something supernatural surrounding her. Hermione frowned, trying to remember the name of the Ravenclaw fourth year in front of her. Oi! Stay out of our discussion, loony, Ron said with an eye roll. This has nothing to do with your thought-up creatures. The girl just smiled a spacey smile at Ron before looking at Harry. They're quite blind, aren't they, my prince? She asked him with a soft voice, and Harry smiled at her. I'm not your prince, he corrected the girl. Hermione stared at Harry and then at the girl before looking back at Harry. Harry gestured to the girl. Hermione, this is Luna Lovegood, he said before looking at Ron with a frown. And her name is Luna, not Loony. Ron rolled his eyes. She's mad, mate, he said. She's still called Luna, Harry interrupted him sternly. Luna meanwhile shrugged. I actually don't mind that much, my prince, she said. Harry just sighed. I'm not your prince, Luna, he repeated, and Luna smiled. You might not be my king, she said with a spacey smile, but that doesn't change the fact that you will always be my prince. Hermione frowned at the girl. Your prince? She repeated, clearly thinking along the thoughts of Luna, fancying Harry. She's lonely, Ron said, waving it off. That's all to it. Of course, my prince, Luna said. That's how you address the heir to the king, after all. Normal prince or immortal prince doesn't matter in that case. I know what a prince is, Hermione said a bit crossly. I want to know why you call Harry a prince. Luna blinked innocently. Because he is one? She asked Harry's female friend. There are some princes and kings in the magical world, you know. For a moment, Hermione clearly contemplated if the girl truly meant it, then her eyes narrowed. The wizarding world doesn't have royals, she said with conviction. Luna looked at her with huge, innocent eyes, her head to the side. Why do you think so? She asked Hermione, her face, even with her dreamy look, serious. Every wizarding raised knows that our world has kings and queens and princes as well. Or what do you think was King Arthur ruling back then? Hermione's eyes widened at that. King Arthur? She repeated in clear disbelief. Ron scratched his head. Yeah, King Arthur was the last magical king of Britain, he said matter-of-factly. Don't you know that Meine? Hermione blinked in surprise, then turned to Ron with a frown. The wizarding world truly has kings and princes? She asked him in disbelief. Ron blinked confused. Nah. Well, we had and some of us still have, he said with a shrug. A lot of our royals were killed. Dunno. Maybe in the last war, or the one before. Hermione's eyes widened. You have royals? She repeated, and Ron frowned at her. I thought you saw that stupid tapestry in Sirius's home naming his house noble, he pointed out. Yes, of course, Hermione replied, but I just thought. That was when she noticed that Harry hadn't reacted at the news at all. Harry? She asked, confused. Why aren't you surprised? Harry looked at her silently. Because I'm not, he finally said. And you shouldn't be as well. If we had any kind of halfway decent history lessons, you actually wouldn't be. He shook his head. This is basic history knowledge when it comes to the magical world, he said, sighing. You should know it, everybody should know it. And yet, here we are with not even purebloods knowing information like that anymore. He shook his head in disgust. What has come this school to that it can't even teach basic knowledge like that anymore? Nothing good, my prince, Luna replied. But I'm not worried, you're here now after all. With that she smiled at him, her dreamy smile full of hidden knowledge and trust. Harry just rolled his eyes at her fondly. You don't have to call me Prince, Luna, he said, amused. Hermione's eyes nearly bugged out. Wait, Harry is a prince? She asked with disbelief in her voice. Ron frowned and his face scrunched up in thoughts. Nah, he said. The Potters aren't royals as far as I know, so he shouldn't be. Harry raised an eyebrow at Luna. There you go, Luna, he said fondly. No prince for me. The other girl pouted. You're still my prince, she said. My immortal prince. This time, Hermione rolled her eyes. I think she fancies you, Harry, she declared, but Luna shook her head. That's not it, she denied. Unlike you, I just know whom I'm talking to. Then Luna's smile broadened. And unlike you, I know that the things the immortal prince is teaching us might be important for our survival, she added. The immortal prince cares for us, after all. We are his children, the people he will protect with everything he has. Harry smiled at the girl. Exactly, he gave in. That was when Hermione's thought process returned to the spell she had objected to at the beginning of their discussion. Her eyes widened. Harry, she exclaimed, that spell you taught us, it's immoral. Harry shot Luna a betrayed look and the girl looked back at him with an innocent smile. Harry rolled his eyes. It's not immoral, he said to Hermione with a sigh. It's effective, and it might save your life. But it might kill our opponent, Hermione objected immediately. Harry frowned at her. Only if the spell he cast at us is deadly, he pointed out. The shield reflects the spell back at the caster, after all. Hermione stared at him, uncomprehending. It still might kill. It's their fault if it does. Harry interrupted her coolly. I'm not Dumbledore. I won't sit by and watch how you work with Stunner against killing curses. It's a shield by wind and fire. If they don't cast anything deadly, it won't hurt them. And if they do, it's their fault to begin with. Hermione opened her mouth to object, just to close it again when she noticed that Harry was right with his assessment. But Dumbledore, she said, anyway, but was interrupted by Harry. Killed hundreds of people with his stunners-only policy, Harry said darkly. I don't plan to repeat his mistakes, if he sees them as such or not. Hermione frowned. But killing people is wrong, she objected unhappily. Harry just pointed at the door. If you don't like it, how I conduct my lessons, there's the door, he said coolly. I'm not keeping you there. Hermione gawked. But Dumble, I told you I'm not going to follow Dumbledore's way of war, Harry told her with a sigh. It's just foolish to wait and watch until the enemy comes knocking. For a moment it looked as if Hermione couldn't object to that, then she frowned. But you named this group Dumbledore's Army, she said confused. Why would you do that if you're so much against the headmaster's way to fight this war? Harry shrugged, his face impassive. I have my reasons, he replied. I didn't know that I had to elaborate them to you. Ron snorted. Well, you're definitely not his mother. Hermione, he said amused. Hermione stared at her other best friend. Doesn't it bother you, Ron? She asked with a frown. The other boy shrugged. Not truly, he admitted. It's Harry. He's the best in defense, and when he says we need to know it, then we might need it for our exams. But also, without him I'd fail defense, and that would mean that Mum'll scold me for hours. So if Harry says we learn that stuff, then I learn that stuff. Ron added, it's definitely a lot better than the toad after all. Hermione stared at Ron, then turned and stared at Harry. This will blow up in our faces, she finally decided with fear in her eyes. This will blow up in our faces and there will be nothing we can do. Harry shrugged. I thought you added and hexed the list of our members to ensure that nothing happens, he said unconcerned. Hermione stared at her best friend. The list isn't foolproof, she replied peeved. Harry shrugged. So it might blow up in our faces in the end, he said unconcerned. But until then, how about you either let me teach what I think necessary to teach, or you leave if you can't stand it. For a moment Hermione clearly looked torn, then she sighed and hung her head. I'll stay and stop criticizing, she said unhappily. Luna patted her on the head. Well done, Hermione, she said dreamily. It definitely takes some practice to recognize that you can't win against the prince if he's sure that he's on the right path. It's definitely better to give up before crossing him, because if you do, he won't forget, and he won't forgive if people under his protection died because of your foolishness. Luna, Harry admonished the girl fondly. The girl just smiled at him. Don't worry, my prince, she said dreamily. I will always follow you. With that she kissed his cheek and hopped out of the room. Hermione and Ron followed her exit with their eyes. I still say she's a bit loony, Ron declared after a second or two of silence. And whatever you say, Harry, you can't change my opinion on that. Hermione nodded slowly. Somehow, she said reluctantly. Ron might be actually right this time around. Harry just rolled his eyes fondly at his two friends. They had no idea. Amelia Bones sighed. She had had a long day, yet it wasn't over. For a moment she contemplated if she should get herself some tea, but then her gaze graced the memories left for her by Ollivander instead. She frowned and looked at them. Until now she hadn't had any time to look into them, although she knew that she should have taken a look just to be a bit more prepared for what was waiting for her. Instead, she had had a hard time stopping Cornelius Fudge in his idiotic plan to shut down not only the Quibbler but the Prophet as well. The minister wasn't happy with the articles of one Oliver Twist and had tried to not only stop the newspapers from printing them, but also had tried to get the newspapers to follow his demands what to write. Sadly, the stockholders of both newspapers hadn't taken too kindly to that demanded control and had sent their barrister the minister's way, which ended with the minister running to her to stop that man. Amelia hadn't been too kind when brushing off Fudge. The man had messed with the law, and it definitely wasn't her problem if he got bitten by it. Of course, considering what she knew of the minister, she guessed that the January meeting of the Wizengamot would be full of new proposals that would end up being passed into laws thanks to Albus Dumbledore's laid-back politics and the aggressive one of Lucius Malfoy, who would back the minister like always. Amelia sighed again and rubbed her forehead. Then she shook her head and put down the paperwork of the Aura department she had been reading. Maybe, she said to herself, it's time to actually look into the new side that asked me to join. Ollivander? Amelia was still surprised that the man had decided to enter politics. She wondered what reason Ollivander had to enter the Wizengamot after so many years. Her gaze drifted back to her pensieve and the memories swirling inside it. For a moment she still hesitated, then she stood up and reached for the pensieve to pick it up and set it down on her desk. For a moment she let it sit there while just staring at it. Then she took a deep breath and entered the memories. Just a second later she fell down the pensieve and came to a hold on the wooden floor of a simple flat in Diagon Alley. A young boy with black hair and oddly silver eyes was standing in front of a man who looked a lot like Ollivander did now. The boy looked to be about 17 and was twirling a wand between his fingers. "Father," he said slowly while watching the wand twirl, "I heard that Alaric Moody is missing." The old man, who had been working on a wand at a desk at the side, sighed. "He is," he said, without looking up from his work. "I also heard that Uncle is searching for him," the boy added and twirled his own wand a bit more. "I want to go and join him in his search." The old man sighed again. "Garrick," he said, startling Amelia because she wouldn't have recognized the young boy as the current wand maker if the man hadn't said the boy's name. "You're not even 17 yet." The boy frowned at him. "It's not as if I proposed to fight a Dark Lord," he pointed out unhappily. "I just want to join Uncle in searching one of my friends." This time the older wand maker looked up from his work to frown at his son. "You're far too young to fight anybody, especially a Dark Lord," he objected unhappily. "You were younger, father," the boy said petulantly, "yet you helped to fight Uncle against Lord Morgan." The father sighed. "I helped to create defenses in Hogwarts like your grandfather helped to create defenses in Diagon Alley," he corrected his son. "I never truly fought with your uncle against Morgan. In the end, it was your uncle and his protectors who fought, and your uncle is by far old enough to fight." Garrick Ollivander frowned. "Uncle is younger than you by 2 years," he pointed out, and his father laughed. "That's the official version," he said. The boy's eyes widened, but his father shook his head before he could ask. "I won't say anything else," he told his son. "It's Sal's prerogative to tell those he trusts. As long as you remember the stories I told you about, you will do fine." The boy frowned. Amelia raised an eyebrow at the young Garrick Ollivander. She had actually no idea what the whole discussion was about, but even with not knowing, she was surprised by Garrick Ollivander's demeanor. She had never pecked the wand maker for someone who even tried to go out and fight. She had always thought that the man had kept out of every conflict between the light and the dark, like every other wand maker did as well. For a moment there was silence between those two men in the memory, then the older one sighed. "You're far too much like me and your grandfather," he said, sighing while shaking his head. "All right, Garrick, go on and join your uncle in his quest to find Alaric, if he lets you, that is. Just come back when you've found your friend." The boy's eyes lit up and he smiled. "Just one thing before you go," the older Ollivander added, and the younger one nodded eagerly. "Promise me to come home before you go out and join a war, will you?" And Amelia wondered if the older wand maker had said the last sentence as a joke or if he meant it. The answer was a hug by the boy. With that, the first memory ended. Amelia suddenly had the odd feeling that whatever she would see within those memories might turn her world around in the end. Minerva McGonagall had been on her way to the staff room after her day in the classroom when she passed by the library. She stopped, her mind suddenly on the words the young Longbottom had told her just a few days ago. Minerva, of course, hadn't believed him, yet she was standing in front of the library, contemplating to step in and look up the members of the Wizards' Council. It was odd, but there had been something in Longbottom's face that had made her pause, and now she couldn't get rid of the thought, what would be if he was right? "Albus would have told me," she reminded herself. "He knows that I believe myself to be common, so he would have told me if that wasn't the case." I mean, what reason does he have to keep something like that from me? She couldn't imagine one reason. Minerva shook her head. Longbottom must have remembered it wrong, she thought. It happens, and the boy has quite a bad memory after all. Yet, please be advised that I might be interested in an alliance if you decide to take up your inheritance, the boy had said, no hesitation, no shyness in his face. Minerva shook her head. This is madness, she decided, and continued her way down the hallway. Utter madness. There's no way that Longbottom could be right about this. Yet a niggling thought would stay with her for the rest of the day. What if? Augusta Longbottom looked over the letter her grandson had written. She couldn't help it. She was proud of him. Since the Professor Malfoy had returned, her grandson had started to change. He had entered a study group in school and had actually started not only to interact with his peers, but to show interest in his duties and politics as well. And now he was actually writing a formal letter to the Lord of House Black. Oh, how proud Augusta was. Just a few months ago it would have been her who would have to write the letter. Now she just had to look it over and sign. Yes, Augusta was definitely proud of her grandson. He was turning out to be exactly like her little Frank. The dowager sighed and then returned to reading the letter her grandson had sent her for her to look over. To the Venerable Lord Black, it read. The House Longbottom hereby writes to you to formalize the alliance your heir proposed to us just a few weeks ago. House Longbottom wishes to reaffirm and officiate this alliance before the first Wizengamot meeting of the new year in January. At this time, House Longbottom will return into the Wizengamot under a new lord and wishes to ensure old alliances and officiate those that have been proposed to ensure the new lord's success. Sincerely, the House of Longbottom. Yes, Augusta Longbottom was very proud of her grandson. He was definitely growing into his own, and Augusta couldn't wait until he was sure enough of himself to insert himself into the politics of their world. With the backing of Professor Malfoy, the involvement into the Grand Family and the alliance with House Black, the wizarding world would quiver under the power of the heir of Longbottom. And Neville was well on his way to be ruthless enough to actually use that power. Exactly like his father. Augusta couldn't wait. Albus Dumbledore and the rest of the so-called light families wouldn't know what hit them. When Amelia Bones could see more than swirling colors again, she thought for a second that she hadn't moved at all from one memory to another. She was still in Ollivander's workshop, still even standing on the same place, but something was different as well. While the older Ollivander, the current one's father, was still working, instead of an empty table next to him, a Daily Prophet was lying there. The headline proclaimed the news that another British couple had died by the hands of some criminals in Europe. The date of the newspaper was smudged, but Amelia could still guess at least the month and the year of it. It seemed to be one from January 1914. In that moment the memory truly started, somewhere in January 1914. Father, a young Garrick Ollivander said while stepping inside his father's shop. I heard that Uncle is now in France, fighting against those criminals that are terrorizing Europe. The older Ollivander didn't even look up from the wand he was currently forging. Haven't you seen him just a few months ago? He asked, his son distractedly. I thought you went and helped him with his search for the young Moody. The boy pouted. I did, he said. At least until he sent me home, telling me that it was getting too dangerous in magical Europe and that he wouldn't let me stay without your conscience. And then he went and found Alaric before I could even ask you to return there. His father said, clearly just listening with half an ear. The younger Ollivander leaned forward to inspect the wand his father was making. Cherry wood and unicorn hair? He asked. Yes, the father replied. It'll be a very good wand when it's ready. Garrick Ollivander nodded. It will be, he assured his father before returning to the topic they had discussed before. So Uncle truly is in France, currently. The father hummed and readjusted the unicorn hair a bit on his workplace before actually merging it with the wood. He is, he finally replied verbally. Your grandfather already wrote him and got the assurance that your uncle is currently taking on those newly emerged criminals with Alaric Moody. Garrick frowned. But Alaric isn't older than me, he said. He's barely out of Hogwarts. So, his father asked uninterestedly while checking over his newest creation. So, am I allowed to go as well? Garrick asked, seemingly innocent. His father blinked and looked at Garrick. Why? He asked, confused. Garrick Ollivander frowned. Because you helped Uncle with Morgan at Hogwarts and Grandfather helped him with securing Diagon Alley, he pointed out, pouting. I don't want to sit by and just watch when you got to help him back then. His father just stared blankly at his son after that declaration. Then the father shrugged. All right, he said, and turned back to his work. But no dying, or you will have to face great-grandfather's wrath. Do you understand me? Garrick Ollivander nodded eagerly. No dying, I promise, he said before running out of the room to pack. It would take 5 years until he would be back home again. Future timeline. Hermione was nervously chewing on her fingernails. But Ron, she finally said, staring at the boy she was in the middle of a discussion with. Something is clearly wrong with Harry. I know we decided to let him be, but we have to do something. We're his friends. If we don't go to an adult and tell them that something's wrong with Harry, who will? Ron sighed. There's nothing wrong with Harry, he said, unconcerned. He's a bit different, I suppose, but that's not too bad, is it? He's still awful at chess. He's still interested in flying, so for all his changes, he's still Harry, isn't he? Ron, Hermione objected, there's more to it than just chess and flying. Look at what he suddenly knows. Look at his changed treatment of others. Look at... Before she could go further, she was interrupted by Neville Longbottom of all people. You two know that Harry can't afford to have rivalries after January, don't you? He asked them with a frown. I think it's just reasonable that he has changed his ways from the start of this year and hasn't waited for the change until shortly before Christmas. Hermione blinked and then looked totally confused at the air of Longbottom. What are you talking about, Neville? She asked. Neville stared at her. The Potter Lordship, he said, then his eyes narrowed. What else? Hermione looked at Ron. Ron looked at Hermione. Then Ron shrugged and Hermione turned to stare at Neville in confusion. What do you mean, his Potter Lordship? She asked him. What Potter Lordship? Neville blinked at her in surprise. Wait, he exclaimed in disbelief. You don't know? Ron scratched his head. Know what? He asked, a bit confused. Neville shook his head. Harry is the heir of the House Potter, he said. He, like a lot of other people in this school, has inherited a lordship from his father. Ron's eyes widened at that. Potter is nobility? He asked, a bit envious. Why didn't Harry say something? Hermione stared at Ron and then at Neville. So, she said slowly, Harry belongs to wizarding nobility? Neville nodded. The Potters are descendants of the Peverells, and the Peverells are old ones. That alone makes them nobility. Families like those are at least 1,000 years old, you know. Their magic is interwoven with the land, and even if they're in no way or form royal, being basically bound to the land like that makes them nobility, he said. Every child of one of the immortal ones would be considered such. Hermione stared at the other boy. Immortal ones? Old ones? What? She stuttered. Ron's face was as confused as hers. Neville sighed. This is all about creatures, he said, sighing. We all inherit our magic from them. There are creatures like goblins or centaurs or mermaids, whatever. They're simply ancestors for us. Then there are a few that are different. They normally don't have a lot of children and they have much greater power than normal creatures. Those are the immortals. The Phoenix is one of them, like the Elder Dragon, the Basilisk and even the Dementor. Neville and the others shuddered after speaking or hearing that word. The most of the immortal have died out or gone insane, Neville added. There are just a few still alive and sane, so the only legacy left are their children with the humans. We, the members of the Wizengamot, we all have at least some blood of one of those immortals in us. And that blood binds us to the land and gives us more power over the others than every other family except of the royals. Hermione blinked. Why? She finally said faintly. Don't we learn this in History of Magic? Neville shrugged. I actually have no idea, he said. Gran has tried to get rid of Binns for decades now, and yet as long as Dumbledore doesn't fire him, the Board of Governors can't do anything about him. Hermione stared at Neville. But there were no books about that in the library as well, she said, confused, and Neville's eyes darkened. There are, he said, but from what I found out, they're in the restricted section. One headmaster or another put them there and nobody bothered to put them back where they belonged. Hermione looked crestfallen at that. So, in other words, there's no way for the Muggle-born like me to learn about it, is there? She asked, unhappily. Neville looked at her uncomfortably. The headmaster has absolute control over Hogwarts. The only exception is the Lord of Hogwarts if there's still one alive, or the founders, he explained to her. The Board of Governors is more a formality, but according to the Charter, it has no influence. The power lies with the headmaster as long as the Lord of Hogwarts doesn't take the castle back. So it's the headmaster who prevents the books to return to the normal section of the library. Neville finished Hermione's crestfallen question. Yes, I can't say that he's doing it deliberately, but it's his duty to educate and ensure that the right books are in the right sections of the library. While Hermione still looked as if her world had just gone into shambles, Ron just shrugged. It's not as if it's that important, he pointed out. The minister has the true power, and he's not bound by the obligations of the lords. Even the Wizengamot isn't fully bound by it any longer, or the likes of Malfoy wouldn't have a seat there. Neville shrugged. The system has derogated, he admitted. There are some people in the Wizengamot that by their blood shouldn't be, and there are some missing that should, but well, I think the reason for that is that the most have stopped stating their line in the name of the throne. Hermione frowned. What? There's an obelisk in the chambers of the Wizengamot, Neville said. A few hundred years ago you still had to state your name and ancestry to it. It was the obelisk who accepted you in the Wizengamot or not. But who? Neville shrugged. Mostly it was one minister or another who wanted those families part of his politics. The seat of those families only exists as long as the minister gives it to them, so it's an easy way to ensure that those families will always vote for the minister. Yeah, like the Malfoys, Ron said, sneering. Neville frowned. No, he said. As far as I remember, the Malfoys have a legitimate seat, it's others that haven't. Ron's eyes nearly bugged out. What do you mean the Malfoys have a legitimate seat? He asked incredulously. It can't be they are the branch family of the House Malfoy. Even if the Malfoys don't have a legitimate claim, the House Malfoy has it since somewhere in the 1400s, Neville said. Hermione frowned at him. How do you know all this? She asked, confused. Neville just shrugged. I had to learn it, he said, unconcerned. It's part of the duty of the heir of Longbottom. Hermione blinked, surprised. Oh, she said. Then her face turned contemplating. So, she said slowly, Harry has to know all this as well. Neville inclined his head. This, and a lot more, he said. He also will have to present himself in front of the Wizengamot like every other heir in January. If he fails to show, House Potter will lose a lot of political clout. It's not taken kindly if the heir of a house like Harry's or mine isn't deemed mature enough to take up his lordship with 15 years of age. Hermione frowned. But why didn't Harry speak to us about all that? She asked. I could have helped him learn. Neville shook his head. Every family has its own secrets, and there are very few who are trained to know them outside the family, he replied. No heir would simply talk about those secrets even if the people they're talking to are close friends. Hermione opened her mouth to object, but Neville stopped her before she could. It's tradition, he said. And it's even more of a tradition when it comes to families like Harry's who have been part of our world for centuries, he told her. Hermione's face set into a determined mask and Neville cringed. He somehow guessed that Hermione wouldn't listen to him about his warning. She looked like a hound on a trail. Neville just hoped that Harry wouldn't give in and tell her his family's secrets. Neville didn't know much about the Potters, but what he knew spoke of a family of old ones. Or worse, even if it had been just rumors and the Potters had never said anything about it, there was still the idea that the Potters were descendants of the firstborn Grim, descendants of Death himself. Neville didn't want to know what would happen if Harry would ever divulge the secrets of Death to somebody who had nothing to do with the family. Moody and Sirius needed a whole week until they finally found what Moody had been looking for. In a box, hidden on top of a cupboard in one of the unused upper rooms, they stumbled upon some leather-bound books. To their surprise, the books weren't cursed or dark at all. Nevertheless, Moody used a stick he had conjured to open the first one. He wasn't willing to touch the book at all if he didn't have to, as long as he didn't know what they were about. The leather of the book was old and some parts looked as if they had been soaked in a brownish substance. Sirius Black stood back while watching the older wizard opening the book. The book didn't have a title, instead it started with a handwritten entry. Moody slowly crept near the book to be able to read the first words of the entry. 6th August 1914. Father was agitated when he returned from the Wizengamot today. There's a new threat in Wizarding Europe, a man who kills of mudbloods, half-bloods, and those with lost magic, squibs, like everybody else calls them. Father doesn't care about the others but to kill of those with lost magic just because they were born with their magic locked away instead of free like mine, to him is criminal. That other families joined that madman and the rest of Britain doesn't care at all. That the criminal Grindelwald is wreaking havoc all over Europe is something that Father can't bear. So when he returned home, he asked us children to come to his office to decide what our family will do now. My brother Arcturus proposed to go to war, and while Father is all for it, he has forbidden Arcturus to go until at least his wife has had her first child, which is due in 6 months' time. I was forbidden to go as well since I am the heir, even if I have already children of my own who can take over the lordship if I die. My brother Cygnus, on the other hand, will leave tomorrow to aid those who fight that madman on the country. I just pray that he'll stay alive, so that he can see his 2-year-old son grow up. I talked it over with my beloved Hesper a few hours ago. I hope my sons and daughter will forgive me, but my Archie is old enough with his 13 years to look after his younger siblings if I die. I will leave at night in 3 days' time. If you read this after I died in battle, Father, then I want you to know that I'm sorry, but I can't sit by and watch my brothers go to war. Sirius Phineas Black. Interestingly, it was Sirius who spoke up first after reading. Damn, he said, and I thought I was the first one who went against the family's wishes. Moody snorted. I'm more surprised that you're named after a man who defied the family, he said gruffly. With such a name's patron, it's no surprise that you rebelled as well. The answer was a smug look from one Sirius Black. Seems like I'm at least living up to my name, he said proudly. Moody rolled his good eye and then reached out for the book. Since it clearly wasn't about dark arts or otherwise spelled, he could definitely read it in a bit nicer setting, he thought. Maybe, just maybe, the book would have some answers about what happened to his father. After all, August, September. You know, Charles Potter said slowly while watching the world burn. This might make us look as if we are a tad insane. Sirius Black frowned and looked at the chaos surrounding them as well. You might be right there, Potter, he said slowly and unwillingly. Ollivander next to them snorted in amusement. Oh, come on, you two, he exclaimed. Don't look like your cat just died. You should be happy. Charles and Sirius Black stared at Ollivander with a look that clearly showed what they thought of that suggestion. Happy? Charles Potter repeated, incredulous. Happy? Sirius Black looked at Ollivander in disgust. I doubt I'd ever feel happy again after what just happened. In that moment, Alaric Moody left the burning camp in front of them to join them on the hills. Why all those long faces? He asked, a bit confused. Ollivander snickered like a schoolgirl and pointed at the unhappy-looking men next to them. They're unsatisfied with the result, he told one of his best friends. Alaric raised an eyebrow. Why? He asked, confused. The camp is eradicated. The wards are in shambles. The enemy has lost some valuable intelligence and men today, and we managed all this with just 4 people. Charles Potter and Sirius Black both stared unhappily at Alaric Moody, while Ollivander had to hide another snicker with both of his hands. Exactly, Ollivander chocked out, amused. That's exactly the problem they're having right now. Alaric Moody frowned and then looked back at the destroyed hideout of the enemy. I don't understand, he said, confused. It worked. Isn't that the most important thing? Charles and Sirius grimaced while avoiding to look at each other. And when the faces of the other 2 men darkened, he added, nearly suffocating on his laughter, They didn't want it to work, he choked out, because if it worked, that means that they could work together as ward breakers, and they don't want to admit that they're compatible. They're a Potter and a Black. They're always on the opposite in a conflict. It's bad enough that they're on the same side, but working together as well. Ollivander snickered again, at least until he was elbowed into both of his sides at the same time. He looked up and saw the Black heir and the Potter heir both glaring at him. Ollivander raised his hands in defeat. It's not my fault, he defended himself. I just suggested another ward master for Black. I had actually no idea that you two would actually work exceptionally good with each other. Sirius pouted and Charles buried his head in his hands. This will be a catastrophe, he mumbled into his hands. A total catastrophe. The lords of the Wizengamot will die in masses from a heart attack if this ever comes out. Ollivander snickered while Ulrich hid a grin. Don't worry, Ulrich finally snorted. We won't say a thing. We're taking it to our graves, I promise. Ollivander chocked on another laughter. I won't? He forced out. I won't? It's far too funny to tell and watch the world burn after. He was elbowed and glared at again from both sides again. Look at you two, he snickered. Not only one brain on the battlefield, but off it as well. Next thing we know, your children will be best friends forevermore. Only over my dead body, both heirs exclaimed at the same time, and we're nothing alike, Ollivander, so shut up. Their chorus just made Ollivander laugh even harder. The two grown men pouted, looked at each other, grimaced and looked away again. They're going to think we've gone insane, Charles moaned. Don't remind me, Sirius replied. I'm still working out how to obliviate myself of those last 4 hours of my life. And while Ulrich watched with a raised eyebrow, Garrick Ollivander toppled over in laughter. Regulus Black was waiting for him at the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets. Now that we have destroyed the ring, what will we do? He asked the younger-looking man, the moment the other one entered. Harry stopped in his tracks. I've read the ward book of the castle, Harry replied, his eyes dark with unhappiness. They haven't been updated in over 30 years. Regulus frowned. That's not good, right? He asked, and Harry shook his head. It isn't, he said, especially considering that the last-placed wards are harmful for the existing ones. The blood wards of the founders are nearly drained and the soul wards have gone dormant. Regulus frowned. So, what does it mean for us? He inquired with a frown. Harry sighed. I'm nearly done with the ward scheme I've been writing, he told the older-looking man. In 1 or 2 days' time I should be far enough to apply it to the current castle wards. Now that I know the wards that are active and that have been applied to the wards already existing, I'm able to work around them to ensure that we find the Horcrux hidden within the castle with the help of the ward I'm working on. For a moment Harry looked up to the ceiling without truly seeing it. Then he shook his head thoughtfully. Thanks to the weakened wards, it might take a day or two to actually see the result of the ward. I plan to add, he added with a frown, my ward will also strain the weakened wards further. So we have to be quick while using it so that I can dissolve it soon, or the children might be unprotected because the wards of Hogwarts crashed. Regulus's eyes narrowed. I thought the wards of Hogwarts are the safest in the world, he said slowly, and Harry inclined his head. The original ones are, he said. Sadly, those are inactive right now, and to activate them I have to rip down the current ones, which would leave the children unprotected for at least a day or two. I'm still willing to do it, but not as long as Albus Dumbledore is the headmaster of Hogwarts and can stop me. It would be disastrous if he stopped me in the middle of ripping down the wards. Breaking wards can kill you instantly if you don't have the finesse or the power to hold them until you're through. Disrupting while someone is breaking down the wards is as dangerous as not knowing what you do. Regulus nodded. I know, he said. I might have no idea about wards in general, but I remember the stories my grandfather told me when I was a child. The answer was a smile from Harry. Oh, he said fondly. Arcturus. I remember him well. He might have never been a ward's master, but he knew quite a bit about them. His father and uncles were some of the best ward breakers I ever met. That stopped Regulus in his thought process. You knew my grandfather? He asked, surprised. Harry smiled. Him and a lot of other blacks, he said with a smile. I have never met a family as entrenched in the dark arts as the blacks, and I have never met a family who has brought forth so many rebels as well. For a moment Harry looked at Regulus thoughtfully. Maybe, he said slowly. It has something to do with the names. It's always a Sirius, a Regulus or an Andromeda who rebels, you know. Others might follow them in the end, but it always starts with them. What a funny consistence, considering that there has been a Sirius or a Regulus or an Andromeda at least every second generation for hundreds of years in your family. Regulus blinked in surprise, then he snorted. Or there are all three in one generation, and yet they still don't rebel together, he said, amused. Harry grinned. How true, he said, amused. And now let me explain how my ward scheme will work so that you can help me find that damn Horcrux the moment I've applied it to the castle. Minerva McGonagall was on the way to the Great Hall when she was stopped by a dreamy-looking fourth-year Ravenclaw. Oh, Professor, the girl exclaimed, have you seen the rackspurts surrounding your head? They're awfully many, you know. Minerva frowned at the odd Ravenclaw. I can assure you, Miss Lovegood, she said, that there are no rackspurts surrounding my head. The dreamily-looking girl just looked at her pityingly. But there are, Professor, she told her sadly. Your thoughts are all fuzzy because of them. You should do something against them, you know. Minerva frowned at the girl. And what do you propose that I do about them? She asked the girl after determining that the girl wouldn't go away by herself. Luna Lovegood contemplated the answer for just a second. Maybe, Professor, she said slowly, you should just listen to others and follow their advices. They sometimes know more than you think, you know. Then the odd girl crooked her head. Of course, she added, you can always go to our prince as well. He might even be able to tell you some stories of those you want to know about. And with that, the girl gave Minerva a blinding smile before curtsying and dancing off the other way. Minerva's eyes followed the girl, just to stop at the door to the library. Again her thoughts returned to Longbottom's words from a few days ago. Especially in the current dark times, the old houses have to stand strong, and Longbottom would be looked down upon if I stepped back and hid behind my grandmother's robes. You should know this, Professor. You are, after all, also part of the Wizengamot, he had told her. Maybe you should look up your ancestry, Professor. You might be surprised when you take a look at the families in the Wizards' Council. But Albus would have told her, wouldn't he? He knew of her belief that she was of common stock. After all, you are, after all, also part of the Wizengamot. Maybe you should look up your ancestry, Professor. Minerva shook her head to quieten those thoughts. This is madness, she told herself. Utter madness. And yet, those thoughts, now returned to her thanks to the odd and dreamy Ravenclaw girl, weren't leaving her alone. What if Albus Dumbledore sat unhappily at his desk inside his office? Something was off, and it had nothing to do with the worsening of Harry Potter's connection with one Tom Marvell O'Riddle. No, it was the castle itself that seemed off to Albus somehow. There was a silent watching, a silent waiting air surrounding it, following Albus everywhere he went. The wards were humming. Yes, something was off, but Albus Dumbledore had no idea what it could be, and he didn't like it. He didn't like it at all. Oh, Fawkes, he said to the Phoenix on the perch in his office. I wish I knew what's actually happening here. He shook his head. I just hope it's not a new ploy from Tom, he said, sighing. If it is, I have no doubt that Harry will be in the middle of it, and with him affected by their connection that much, it might not go over as well as it did in the past. No, Albus couldn't use one of Voldemort's ploys right now, at least not until he had managed to free Harry a bit from the enemy's influence. I wonder what happened to the Malfoys, he said to himself, then he shook his head. He had to talk to Alastor Moody, the sooner the better, who knew what his old friend had been doing while Albus was watching his school. After all, Fawkes meanwhile looked at the headmaster pityingly. How could that old manipulator not feel the power of the Lord of the Castle trenching the wards? Soon the headmaster would be just one step away from losing every influence he had over the castle to the one who was its true master. And Fawkes was sure that the master of the castle wasn't setting out to be lenient in his quest to take back what was rightfully his. 26th August 1914. Something horrible happened today. I actually managed to work well with a Potter. A Potter. We have been political enemies for at least 200 years now. If Father knew, he would disown me. But the most horrible part is that I actually don't mind working with him as much as I act that I do. He's surprisingly pleasant to work with. He's quite witty and seems to know exactly what I plan to do next. It's a lot easier than with my brother, and I guess that shocks me the most. I'm still cursing Ollivander for his damnable idea to put us together in the first place. But at the same time, I'm oddly thankful to him that he did it. I've never had a partner I could work with that instinctively as Charles Harry James Potter. Damn Ollivander for suggesting that our children will be best friends one day. Of course, I heavily objected to that statement, but truthfully, I guess I wouldn't mind that much. I can actually see it. My grandson, because I fear my children are already too old to be good friends to Potter's potential and yet unborn ones, and Charles Potter's children playing together at Grimmauld Place. Oddly enough, it makes a lovely picture in my head. Maybe I like it because I actually like working with Charles Potter. If you read this because I died, Father, then I guess I'm sorry for what I wrote just now. I know that you'd not be happy with me if you knew, but these are my thoughts, so if you're reading them, I guess you have to live with them. Sirius Phineas Black. It was odd. For years and years he had felt like the odd one out in the family. For years he had felt that there was nothing but the blood in his veins that connected him with them, and yet, after all these years, he finally had found the connection to his family he had carved for when he was a child. Sirius Phineas Black had been a man Sirius Orion Black would have loved to call a relative. This man had been friends with a Potter, had fought against the darkness and yet had still been accepted by his family. This man was the man Sirius Orion Black was named after. And for the first time in his life, Sirius actually felt honored to bear the name he had. "What are you dreaming about over there, Black?" Moody asked gruffly. The other man was in a bad mood, because while the diary of Sirius Phineas Black had some entries about the war with Grindelwald, it wasn't actually enough to answer Moody's questions. There was no entry that depicted the death of Alaric Moody, and while the name of Moody's father was often mentioned, it, together with Garrick Ollivander's and Charles Potter's names, was nearly the only one mentioned. The only other names that sometimes were thrown in were the names of one Sal Sanctuary and some family names, like Sirius Phineas's children or brothers or nephews. Sadly enough, all those people didn't interest Moody at all. "Don't be grumpy, Mad-Eye," Sirius Orion Black said. "Just because you didn't find what you were looking for, it doesn't mean that I didn't find something of interest in those journals." The Exora frowned at Sirius, then his face darkened. "Whatever," he said. "I at least wasted my time reading those for the last few days. I'm not further than I was before, which means that I have to find other resources to find out about my father." Sirius shrugged. "Didn't you say something about an uncle?" he asked disinterestedly while caressing the spine of the book in his lap. Moody nodded. "I was about to leave to try and contact him again, but you didn't react when I tried to tell you," he said unhappily. Sirius shrugged. "Well, now that I know you can leave," he said. For a moment Moody stared at him with an odd expression on his face, then he inclined his head. "As you say, Black," he said. "Then I'm off." Sirius just waved and then returned to staring at the book, not reacting when the door banged close. Only 20 minutes later, Sirius moved from the place he was sitting at and put down the book, and he only moved because an owl was persisting on gaining entry through the window. Sirius opened the window and took the letter from the owl, not at all that pleased to be interrupted in his thoughts. It was only when he looked at the crest of the letter that he peeked up. It was the Longbottom crest. But what did the Longbottoms want from him now, after all those years? August, September 9. "So, this is Theseus Scamander," Sirius Phineas Black said while watching the other man walk by with a frown. "I'm not sure if I should be impressed by his guts to come here or feel offended that he's used as the face of our resistance." Charles Potter next to him rolled his eyes. "Stop being so melodramatic, Black," he said, half amused, half exasperated. "It's not as if either of us could be used as the face of our organization, as you put it." Sirius frowned. "Why not?" he asked. I'm sure as hell handsome enough to be the poster boy. Yeah, and dark enough to make them flee from us when they know you're part of our resistance, before we can even tell them that you're fighting the good fight this time around," Charles pointed out coolly. "Honestly, Black, we need people to join us, and not to run from us as if we're worse than Grendel. Whatever." Sirius Black threw the other man a hurt look. "I'm well versed in charming people, Potter," he pointed out unhappily, and Ollivander, who was standing behind them and going over his plans, snorted in amusement. "I am," Sirius repeated, clearly having heard Ollivander's reaction. "Oh, I don't doubt it," Ollivander said while marking the new possible places of the enemy's attacks. "But we're not out to get the ladies into our beds, we're out to get fighters, and those you can't charm with the charm you have." Sirius sent the young wandmaker a betrayed look. Charles, on the other hand, hid his smile behind his face. "I guess you might be right with that one, Garrick," he said, amused. "After all, as far as I know, the black charm always worked just the one way you described right now." Sirius opened his mouth to object, but was interrupted by another arrival. "What are you doing here, lingering and watching the rest of the camp?" Ulrich Moody asked with a frown. "Don't you have something else to do but to gossip?" When two offended heirs turned their gaze on him, Garrick Ollivander spoke up again. "I have two possible places for the enemy's next attack," he said. "The likelihood that they're either attacking the magical side of North Chateau or Virton next is highly likely." Immediately, the three others turned to him and also looked at his plans. "Why?" Ulrich asked, Ollivander frowning. The wandmaker pointed at some other marked places on his map. "The Muggles are currently on their way there too," he said. "If they keep up with their pattern, they will use the Muggle War as a cover like they did before." Charles and Sirius exchanged an unhappy look. "That sounds quite possible." The black heir finally settled on quite unhappily. "This will be a fiasco," Charles muttered while turning the map so that he could look at it closer. "Stopping those bastards while surrounded by Muggles, not a good idea." "Well," Ollivander said with a frown, "I think that might be the reason why they do it." When the others looked at him in confusion, he shrugged. "Unlike us, they don't care about the statute," he pointed out reasonably. "So they know that we might hesitate to attack them and stop them because the risk of magic being found out is exceptionally higher if we actually fight back, you know." "So what?" Ulrich asked, while looking from one man to the other. "We just sit by and watch because we might expose the magical world when we don't." He definitely didn't sound happy when he mentioned that solution. Ollivander frowned. "It would be the best and yet also the worst thing to do," he said slowly. "If we sit by and watch, we will give them a lot more strength than they already have, but if we don't, we might end up exposing magic." They looked at each other. Charles frowned at the charts. "What?" he said slowly. "If we actually split up the jobs?" Sirius frowned at that, but it was more thoughtful than unhappy this time. Ollivander and Alaric exchanged a confused glance. "That might be a good idea," Sirius said slowly. "You and I already take on the wards, we just have to split the rest of the jobs like we split our work with the wards between us two." This time, slow understanding entered Alaric's face. "So," he said as slowly as Charles had done so before, "either Garrick or I will take over attacking, and the other obliviating if necessary," Ollivander added, now also catching on. "An interesting idea." He looked at the map thoughtfully. "We should test it." The answer was a matching grin on the other men's faces. "Why not?" Sirius said. "Let's go and get some action. Unlike our poster boy Theseus, we at least can do some dirty work." With that, the four allies walked off to find their leader and get permission for their newest mission. Sirius Orion Black closed the letter of the Longbottoms he had been reading and looked up to stare at the wall in front of him. The Longbottoms wanted an alliance. No. The Longbottoms wanted to confirm an alliance that had already been established by a member of Sirius's family, and not any member, but an heir. Sirius frowned. Who was the heir of Black after him? The only name he could think of was his brother, but Regulus was dead, so there was no way that it could have been his brother who established the alliance. Still, Sirius looked back at the letter in his hands. To the Venerable Lord Black, it read. "The House Longbottom hereby writes to you to formalize the alliance Your heir proposed to us just a few weeks ago. House Longton wishes to reaffirm and officiate this alliance before the first Wizengamot meeting of the new year in January. At this time, House Longbottom will return into the Wizengamot under a new lord and wishes to ensure old alliances and officiate those that have been proposed to ensure the new lord's success. Sincerely, the House of Longbottom. Sirius frowned again. What other heir but his dead brother did the Black family have? Draco Malfoy? No, he was the heir of Malfoy and would have named himself such, not even considering that the Malfoy family wouldn't have approached the Longbottoms for an alliance, and if they would, Longbottom wouldn't have accepted the alliance. So who else? The Lestrangers were out for obvious reasons. Harry? But even if Harry was possible, he would have still been the Potter heir first, and the Longbottom family would have mentioned that. Sirius pondered that question a bit longer, but in the end he sighed and closed his eyes. He was quite sure that he wouldn't find that answer while looking into nothingness. In the end, Sirius decided something he hadn't planned to do at all. He closed his eyes again in defeat. Gringotts, he whispered to himself unhappily, here I come. It seemed as if he would take up his lordship, something he hadn't wanted to do in his whole life. Moody knelt in front of the fireplace, staring into the flames. Alastair, the current Lord Delacour, greeted him with a thick French accent, the moment the flames vanished and showed the middle-aged man's face. Lewis, Moody replied, and his magical eye turned to take a look at the entrance to the room he was in. Is your grandfather somewhere near? My grandpère? The Lord Delacour said, surprised. I thought that you and he weren't talking with each other anymore? Moody sighed. I guess that might be true, he admitted. I was a bit unhappy with Uncle Jerome the last time we talked. Louis Delacour's eyes narrowed. As far as I remember, you stormed out after Grandpère said something about Le Fumarius, Louis said accusingly, and Moody shifted a bit uncomfortably. I might have reacted like that, he admitted, feeling a bit foolish for his words and deeds of the past. But now I need to talk to him. The Lord Delacour raised an eyebrow. What about? He asked. Moody sighed again. Grindelwald, he admitted, and everything connected to him. The other man looked at him disbelievingly. You always fight with Grandpère when it comes to Grindelwald and the war, Louis Delacour pointed out coolly. Moody closed his eyes in regret. He wondered how long his uncle had tried to tell him the truth, and he hadn't wanted to listen. I know, he said tiredly. I know I never listened, but I need to talk to Uncle Jerome. I promise I will listen this time around. Louis raised an eyebrow in surprise. How come? He asked, interestedly, and Moody sighed. Someone told me some things I never knew about the death of my father, he said truthfully. And I need to know if what he said is true. I need to know, and Uncle Jerome might know a lot more about it than I ever thought. Louis's lips twitched in hidden amusement. He might, he said. All right. I'll tell Grandpère that you want to talk to him. He's currently not here, but with a friend. But I'll tell him the moment he's back. I guess he will contact you to ensure that you can talk. Alastair Moody nodded. Thank you, Louis, he said, and then ended the flu call. He hadn't gotten the answers he had been looking for, but at least he had the chance that his uncle would answer him before the week ended, and that was more than he had just hours ago. And then I will finally see who's been speaking the truth all along, Moody said to himself. Moody knew himself well enough that if the answer was different than he hoped, not only his beliefs but also his friendship would be challenged, and chances were that neither would survive the meeting with his uncle. August-September 19. Wow! Theseus Scamander jumped to the side and avoided by just half an inch or less the spell from the man he was fighting. Careful with that stick. You could hurt someone if you swish it around like that. The answer were even more spells thrown at him by his enemies. He was outnumbered 1 against 20, yet he had no inclination to give up fighting. But then, Theseus was a knight, at least that's what he was called in the language of the resistance. It meant that he was one of the fighters, and not part of the support, so he definitely wouldn't give up his duty as a knight right now in the face of the enemy. Instead, Theseus ducked, nearly avoiding every single one of the spells coming at him. Oh, come on, he cried. Can't we talk it out like normal people? "You're an idiot if you think I would talk to someone like you," one of his enemies replied, clearly fed up by Theseus' luck when it came to avoiding spells, before firing another volley of dark spells at Theseus' Scamander. "Oh, please, man, make peace, not war," Theseus complained. "We don't have to fight." Before he could end his sentence, he had to jump from one foot to the other to escape some vicious unforgivables fired at him by some of the others. 1 against 20? That's not fair, he complained. "Can't you do the honorable thing and come at me all at once?" That ensured him some disbelieving looks from the men he was fighting. "You," one of his enemies said with an eye roll before firing another spell at him, "have an odd idea what it means to do the honorable thing." Theseus shrugged and dodged another volley of spells. "What can I say?" he said. "I'm an odd person." That time around, neither of his enemies objected. But then, considering that they were having a go at him for nearly half an hour already, and the only thing Theseus had cast in that time was a tickling jinx, well, you didn't argue when the person in question clearly assessed himself correctly. Again, spells came flying at Theseus, and the man danced and hopped and jumped and ducked out of their way. "Oh, please," he said. "All at once," I said. "Not one after another." "Insane," one of his enemies uttered to himself.
"All right, they
cried. "You can stop distracting them now?" As an answer, Theseus' Scamander stopped hopping around. "Finally," he said, and the clueless face changed into a serious and determined one. Icy eyes met those of his enemies. "Run," he told them, and raised his wand. The next moment, the night sky behind him lit up with spellfire and wards. Not another 2 minutes later, his attackers were on the floor, either dead or unconsciousness. And while Theseus watched his opponents in case someone had gotten away and was currently playing dead, Garrick Ollivander, Alaric Moody, Sirius Black and Charles Potter stepped up next to Theseus' Scamander. "Well done, Scamander," Sirius said while looking at their enemies with fathomless eyes. "Let's get them bagged or bound. We've got to leave before more of those bastards come by and surprise us." The others nodded. It wouldn't be the first fight they would win, and it wouldn't be the last, but it would be memorable all on its own anyway. Minerva sat at her table in her office, staring into space. In her head she was still hearing Longbottom's words about her family. Maybe Minerva would have long since dismissed those words, but something in Longbottom's voice, something about Lovegood's words had stuck with her and kept her thinking about it. What if it was true? What if it was something that Albus hadn't mentioned to her because he knew that she wouldn't look it up if he didn't say anything, because he knew she wouldn't believe anything like that if somebody else told her about it? But Longbottom? Something in his voice, in his gaze, had made her doubt. Something in his eyes had told her to take him seriously, yet she still couldn't bring herself to go into the library to find out the truth. Since she had found out decades ago that her father's family had come from magical blood and had just lost their magic sometime in the past, Minerva had looked for anything related to that family. Her father had been a squib like her grandfather and her great-grandfather whose father had been magical. Since then, she had known that her father's family had been magical once and that they had been customers at Gringotts, meaning that they left Minerva as the only magical descendant a vault with a little bit of money. But Minerva hadn't known more, so she had gone, looking for it. But there had been nothing. She had found thousands of things about other families, but of her own there was nothing. And all the while she had trusted Albus, who knew about her search, to tell her when he stumbled upon something related to her family. All that time Albus had known how desperate Minerva had been for a connection to her magical ancestry, for any hint about it, and yet, what was when Longbottom was right? What did it mean, if her family had been part of the Wizengamot, if she had been unable to find her relations because the old families of the Wizengamot were protected by more than just their wards? Minerva knew for a fact that there was nothing about the Longbottoms or the Potters to find if you didn't know that they were part of the Wizengamot first. So why did she still hesitate? Why did she fear to go to the library and confirm that finding her family was still nothing but a pipe dream? Maybe, she guessed, that was because, if Longbottom was right, she would have trusted the wrong man all along. And yet, Minerva's eyes flickered to the paper in front of her. Maybe, she mused, thoughtfully. It's time that I open my eyes and start doubting him. It was a complicated thought, full of contradictory emotions and warring memories and beliefs. Minerva clenched her fists around the newspaper in her grasp and closed her eyes. Maybe, she thought to herself, it's already too late. I have started to look at him critically. Maybe there's no way to go back anymore. Yes, Minerva had started to doubt, and the newspaper in her hand just helped with her doubt. She sighed, shook her head, and then stood up to finally do what she had hesitated to do for days now. Just a few minutes later, Minerva stepped into the library and up to Madame Pince. Irma, she said, I need your help. The librarian looked at her with a raised eyebrow. What do you need, Minerva? She asked. I need information about the Wizards' Council and its members. Minerva said truthfully, I need the names of the families that belonged to it. Irma Pince just stared at her. Whatever for, Minerva? She asked, barely hiding the surprise in her voice. I just need to confirm or deny something, Irma, Minerva told her truthfully. The librarian stared at her another second or two, then she nodded briskly and stood up to lead Minerva towards one of the back shelves in her domain. She pulled out a book and handed it to Minerva without ever letting her see the title. Here, she said, whatever you want to look up that for, in this book you will find what you're looking for. Minerva stared at the inconspicuous book in her hands. Thank you, she said slowly. The librarian nodded and then walked away briskly to deal with two Hufflepuffs who were definitely talking too loudly for a library, leaving Minerva to stare at the book within her hands. This was it, she thought. This was her truth. She opened the book within her hands, searched the registry for the pages she was looking for, and then opened the book on the right page. Her grip tightened. Black, she whispered. Bones? Her finger wandered down the page full of names. Emerus. She stopped in her tracks for a second after reading that name before continuing down. No, she was looking. She froze. There it was. Black on cream. She had reached what she had been looking for, what she had doubted to find, just to find it anyway. McGonagall, the registry said. Minerva stared at the name, her head swimming with disbelief and confusion. McGonagall, she said aloud. Her family had been part of the Wizards' Council. Her family was part of the Wizengamot, and Albus had never said a word. Minerva had searched everywhere to find her magical family. Minerva had begged Albus for his help, and he had promised to look as well. Albus had known the members of the Wizards' Council for decades now, while always knowing that Minerva was searching for that particular connection to find her family, yet he had never said a word. Minerva's eyes narrowed. Why had he never said? Hadn't it been her right to know? It was her family. Albus had known how much she carved that connection. Albus had known how much it would have meant to her. Then another thought hit her. My family is old, she thought, dazed. My family is, just because of that and the connections it has, thanks to that fact, powerful. She stared at the registry in her hands. If my family has had always that much power and Albus knew, she thought, confused. Why didn't he tell me just because of that when the last war went downhill? Couldn't she have helped, especially considering the power of a family as old as hers? Couldn't she have had a lot more influence they could have used to fight the war and Tom Riddle? Wasn't it her right to use her name and the power it gave her to pursue the enemy who wanted to destroy them? Why hadn't Albus said anything? It was then that it finally hit her. Yes, she could have helped with her name. She could have politically helped. She could have been involved politically. My family was part of the Wizards' Council, Minerva whispered to herself. The Wizards' Council and all its members build the foundation of the current Wizengamot. My family is part of the Wizengamot. Minerva stared blindly at the page in front of her eyes, still not believing what she was seeing. Her family was part of the Wizengamot. No, not her family. She was part of the Wizengamot. Longbottom hadn't lied. She was part of the Wizengamot. She was part of the Wizengamot. Suddenly ice-cold fury enveloped her. Albus had a lot to answer for. Minerva closed the book and then turned to face the door. Her eyes narrowed. Her fury spiked even more. The shelves of the library shivered like an animal captured by a predator. Minerva swept out of the library. The students she encountered ducked their heads and kept them down while she passed them, not that Minerva saw. All her focus was directed at just one direction, and truly just one alone. Albus. Let's see what an explanation the old goat had for keeping that from her all this time. May 9. Ollivander was standing in the middle of a massacre. His shoulders were slumped, and he was tired beyond relief. A man stepped up next to him and clasped his shoulder. This shouldn't have happened, Cygnus Black, one Sirius Black's brother, said with tears in his eyes. Ollivander knew that half of Cygnus's team was lying in front of them, not moving and dead. It shouldn't have, Ollivander said tiredly. But this is war, things like that happen. The answer was a sniff. It still shouldn't have, Cygnus replied while fighting of his tears. We were good, we were a fabulous team. This shouldn't have happened to us. It shouldn't have. Ollivander sighed and then slowly wrapped his hands around the raging man. It's war, he said. And even with our best planning, if Britain would just enter this war already, Cygnus hissed while his grief turned into fury. If those idiots from the Wizengamot would just acknowledge that the rest of Europe needs them, if they'd just get up their asses and fight, Ollivander sighed. You know that there's some who try to make them see reason, he told the other man, and Cygnus sneered. Yes, he said. And then Wonderboy says that they're exaggerating and they believe him. Second coming of Merlin, my ass. Ollivander shrugged. That's politics for you, he pointed out. There will always be some people who will sit back and hope that the problem will just go away if they refuse to look. Cygnus snorted. And because of them, my team is dead, he said icily. Politics. I hate them. With that he freed himself from Ollivander's grasp and stalked off. The wand-maker just shook his head and looked back at the bodies of the dead. He could understand Cygnus, but at the same time, he also knew that even without the support from Britain, they would give everything to fight the evil that was currently tyrannizing magical Europe. Albus Dumbledore sat in his chair, rubbing his head. He had a headache. Minerva, Albus thought, sighing, truly can be dangerous if she wants to. The deputy headmistress had come into his room just half an hour ago, fury in her eyes. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, she had thundered the moment she entered the office. How could you? Albus, who had been working on his paperwork, winced, his eyes flitting to the eyes of his deputy. Minerva. What? You, Minerva screeched, her eyes narrowing at him while she interrupted him icily. You lied to me. I trusted you for years, and you had the cheek to lie to me. Albus stopped himself, totally confused what was going on. He had no idea what Minerva was talking about or why she was absolutely furious with him. You researched the Wizards' Council. Minerva growled. You researched it and its members years ago, and you said nothing. This time, Albus couldn't stop his eyes from widening and betraying him by that action. He had never thought that Minerva would find out about her right as a member of the Wizengamot without him telling her. He had always believed that if he ever needed the seat of McGonagall, he would be able to talk Minerva into giving it to him without actually telling her what she was giving away. It had been one of his security measurements, one of those he felt the most sure about considering the age and therefore prestige of the seat. Of course, having a seat like that, active without Albus needing it, would have just disrupted the current balance of the Wizengamot, something that Albus hadn't wanted to do at all for the fear of the unknown alliances that old seat bore already. After all, who knew which alliances were still active from back then? Albus had researched the Wizards' Council back then, and McGonagall had tight ties with the Black, Greengrass and Knot families as well as the Slytherins, the Peverells and the Moody's, the most of those families no families Albus Dumbledore wanted to have any kind of ties with. Considering that he couldn't find out if those ties were still active alliances or not, Albus hadn't wanted to actually risk it. And now Minerva knew. Minerva, he said, trying to keep cool. You don't have any idea what you're—
Oh, Albus,
she growled. I think I have more of an idea than you want to think. No, Minerva, Albus objected immediately. You can't take the seat. You have no idea about the alliances you will be forced. Minerva slapped him. She actually slapped him. We are over, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. she forced out through gritted teeth. You knew that I was longing for a connection to my wizarding family, since I found out that my father was a squib and not a muggle. You knew that I was looking for information. Of course, but the seat in the Wizengamot is exactly that connection I would have needed to find out more about my family. Minerva screeched. If you hadn't wanted me to take the seat for whatever reason, I wouldn't have taken it because I trusted you. Then don't take. No, Albus. That naivety is over, Minerva growled. I'm over with blindly following you. But Minerva, Albus objected, suddenly feeling fear. If Minerva went against him, the whole balance of the Wizengamot wouldn't just be off, but totally gone. You have to listen to me. Your seat is connected with a lot of dark families. You would be allied with Slytherin and the Knots, and maybe they're all better choices than you, Minerva exclaimed angrily. With that, she slammed down the newspaper in her hand onto Albus's desk. If it wasn't for the children, I would ensure that we wouldn't even work together anymore, she told him, matter-of-factly. As it is, I hope you will refrain from actually talking to me in any other capability as my employer. With that, she turned around and rushed to his door, just to stop with the handle in her hand to turn back to him with fire in her eyes. We will see each other in the Wizengamot, she told him. Don't worry. We won't be allies there. With that, she stormed out and closed the door behind her. Since then, Albus was sitting in his chair, his head cradled in his hands, staring into nothingness. Minerva, he repeated with a sigh, is truly dangerous if she wants to, he guessed. He would have to make a lot of amends to ensure that the McGonagall seat wouldn't act against his alliance in the Wizengamot in January, because if it did, it would be a disaster with unimaginable magnitude. And then Albus's gaze fixed onto the headlines of Oliver Twist's article in the Quibbler Minerva had thrown at him. This, Albus thought darkly the moment he registered the article's title. I have to stop this. I have delayed this enough. I have to stop Twist. And yet, maybe Albus had to admit, maybe just solely to himself, maybe it was already too late for that already. The eyes that follow you. Our headmaster should be minister. Why does Professor Dumbledore refuse to leave Hogwarts? He would be a great minister. Are these some questions you have heard or asked yourself before? I bet they are. I heard them just a few days ago and decided to look into them. The answer I found seems not to fit at all with the man I thought to be a grandfatherly old man who is maybe a little bit crazy. Instead, the answer points to something else entirely. But let's start with another question. Have you ever wondered how the headmaster of Hogwarts seems to know everything you are doing? When you have, then you have never ever read Hogwarts, a history. The headmaster knows everything because the castle herself is reporting to him. The paintings, the armors, and even the walls. The headmaster can access everything and get information out of it. Wards, as old as the school, work to his favor. But why, do you ask? Why do we have to suffer from incompetent teachers? Why do we have to suffer from bullying? When the headmaster knows everything, why does he not stop things like that to happen? Why are there possessed teachers, polyjuiced teachers, bully teachers? The answer is simple. The answer is gruesome. Because he lets them be, it is. He looks away when you are cornered by other students. He looks away when a dark object is possessing and slowly draining you. He looks away when someone impersonates a teacher to get you. And when you want to argue that that never happened, I will tell you some stories I overheard in the hallways of our beautiful school. There once was a boy, I tell you. He was young, maybe a first year. He had to fight a troll because the headmaster did not act. He had to fight a Dark Lord because the headmaster did set him up to it. There once was a boy who asked another one for the hand of friendship. He was rejected, even when he tried again. Next, he was bullied by his own parents to act like he should, all because the headmaster neglected to give him a safe haven at school. There once was a girl that was a little bit different than the others. She was bullied mercilessly by students of her own house. Her things were hidden by the offenders, her homework destroyed, her books taken, all because a headmaster decided to look the other way every time he should have looked at her. There once was a boy, I tell you. He was called the heir of Slytherin. He was called an evil bastard. He was called the wannabe killer of all Muggle-borns. All because the headmaster stayed silent, while knowing that it never was the boy in the first place. There once was a girl who suffered an entire year, a first-year girl who still wakes up screaming. She wasn't rescued from her abuser for a whole year, simply because the headmaster closed his eyes and stirred a boy until he found out the truth. There once was a boy who was bullied all of his years of school. He still has a grudge against the people who stole his childhood. He still suffers from their doing, all because a headmaster had no time to look at a child of a house he does not like himself. All because the headmaster needed someone who he could control to his liking. All because a headmaster chose not to act, even when the boy nearly died at the hands of the others. Now you tell me that this can't be true, and that I was lying. But before you do this, just ask the portrait near you if it has to answer to someone, and when the portrait does answer and tells you, yes, I answer to the headmasters and the founders, then look around you in the hall. And then think about the fact that most of the portraits in school have some other frames in their ancestral homes. They come home every other week, listen to the talking of their children and descendants. Then they return to Hogwarts and answer you. I answer to the headmaster and the founders. The founders once promised never to ask about the things the portraits heard and saw in their ancestral homes. The headmaster was never restricted by that oath. The headmaster refused a position of power because he does not want to lead someone. The minister asks Dumbledore for advice. The minister loses his job when he does something wrong. He loses his power. But Albus Dumbledore is still headmaster after such a long time. Ask yourself, why did he never leave Hogwarts to become the minister? And when you do, think about your whole life. Think about what you read, and then keep in mind that there is not just one of a kind in the world. Then look around the halls of Hogwarts, and maybe you find the children I have been talking about previously walking right beside you. And when you do, just ask some questions, and you might get answers you never wanted to have in the first place. Oliver Twist. November. Lullaby. I need a lullaby. It was Ollivander who stopped the frantic run of the man through their camp. Who are you and what are you doing here? He asked with a frown. And how do you know the code words we use? The other man nearly fell over when Ollivander stopped him so abruptly, but instead of answering, his eyes lit up the moment they fell on Ollivander. Your God, whatever, Ollivander, he cried. You're part of the lullabies, aren't you? Another man stepped up next to Ollivander, his hand on his wand. I thought that Sal protested against calling the Obliviator Squad lullabies, he asked with a frown. The man who had been caught by Ollivander waved it off. I'm sure that as long as the ears and I use it often enough, Sal won't have a chance to stop the name from festering, he said. Then his eyes narrowed at the newcomer. You're Sirius Black, aren't you? My brother Thurs talked about you the last time he wrote me. Sirius' eyes narrowed. And you are? He asked coolly. The red-haired man blinked innocently, suddenly looking more like a shy schoolboy than a man. Oh, he said. I'm one of the Iron Bellies, you know, Dragon Division and all that. I'm the Ukrainian one from the Eastern Front. Ollivander and Sirius exchanged a confused glance. Aren't Iron Bellies dragons? Sirius asked, confused. The other man waved it off. Dragons, spies, whatever doesn't matter, he said. Dismissively, what matters is that I need a lullaby before my spell wears off. I'm quite sure we don't want a muggle running around who knows that we exist in the middle of a war. Huh? The red-haired man looked at him for a moment as if he couldn't comprehend the question. Then he shrugged. Newton, he said. But the as and most other people call me Newt. Ah, Sirius said in that moment. You're the insane brother of his. Newt pouted. I'm not insane, he countered. Now, will a lullaby come with me to help me, or should I attempt to obliviate the muggle myself? I just want to tell you that the last time I tried that, the man couldn't differentiate between his head and his toes when I was done with him. Ollivander snorted. I'll go with you, he said. I was anyway on my way to my shift in the Obliviator Squad. Lullaby, Newt corrected. Lullaby, Ollivander acquiesced. With that they hurried off together. July 1917. Garrick Ollivander sat down next to Charles Potter and Sirius Black, who were looking at the flames of their little campfire in front of them. "You know," Garrick said, "I heard a rumor today about Grindelwald." "What kind of rumor?" Ulrich Moody asked while sitting down next to Garrick with some soup in his hands. He was followed by Theseus Scamander and a dark-haired man with oddly piercing green eyes in the color of the killing curse. "Something hilarious, I hope," Theseus Scamander added. "I could use a good laugh." The man next to him raised an eyebrow at the older Scamander. "You always have a good laugh if the enemy's upon us and all seems lost, or if we're partying doesn't actually matter to you," he countered dryly. Theseus turned to look at the man innocently. "But Sal," he mock-whined, "you can't just blurt out things like that. What will the girls say if you imply that I'm insane while I try to hook them up?" Sal just looked pointedly at the darkness of the forest around them. "What girls?" he asked, and Theseus pouted. Elric snorted, but Garrick just shook his head. "Sadly, it's nothing amusing," he said unhappily. "There's a rumor going around that Grindelwald managed to get his hands on a legendary wand." Charles looked up from the flames at that. His eyes narrowed. "What wand?" he asked sharply. Garrick shrugged. "It's called the Death Stick," he said. "There's a rumor that it's part of the Deathly Hallows, from the tale, you know." Sirius Black frowned. "How reliable is that rumor?" he asked, concerned. Garrick shrugged. "I can't say," he said. "All I can say is that he's gotten even more vicious than he already was." Ulrich rolled his eyes. "It's just a fairy tale," he said, clearly not believing it. "There's nothing like the Deathly Hallows." Sal opened his mouth, clearly to object, when Charles Potter spoke up again, his voice grave, but utterly convinced. "There is," he said unhappily, "and they're damn dangerous in the wrong hands." The others, except Sal, looked at each other suddenly uneasy, especially when Sal just nodded and added, "They are," his voice as sure as Charles's when he finally spoke up. For a moment there was utter silence between the friends. Then Alaric combed a shaking hand through his hair. "Then we should ensure that he's not finding the other two pieces as well," he said, his voice shaking as much as his hand. "I don't fancy to fight the Master of Death." The others nodded, suddenly ill at ease. Charles just shook his head. "You would never fight the Master of Death," he said, his voice clear and strong. "My family has always known more about the Deathly Hallows than any other family, and I can guarantee you'd never fight the Master of Death." Sirius frowned at that. "Why not?" he asked. "If Grindelwald finds the other two, then he still wouldn't be the Master of Death," Charles said and looked at his friends calmly. "The true Master accepts death as a part of life. He won't try to command it. The role of the Master is balance. He's there to fight and yet accept death. It's not an easy role. Death is natural, and yet as the balance, the Master would have to fight it without going so far to try and rule it." "Sounds like a difficult job," Theseus snorted. "Nothing I'd truly want to do." "And lonely," Garrick added. Charles nodded. "Considering that the Master would be unable to die until he'd give up his job as the balance or until every other life on Earth ended, it's definitely lonely," he agreed. Sirius shuddered. "Not a role I'd wanted to take," he said. "I'd hate to have to sit by and watch my family die, especially if I'd know I'd had the power to change it, but it would be unnatural to do so." Charles nodded gravely. "There's a legend in my family that one of my ancestors was the last Master of Death," he said. "He was also called the First Grim, because he wasn't human but a Grim and the son of Death himself. According to legend, he gave up his position after thousands of years of loneliness by killing himself in front of his children." The others shuddered and Sal's face had blanked into an unreadable mask. For a moment, silence reigned, then Sal spoke up again. "Maybe," he said slowly, "we should use the time tonight to talk about something happier than the discussion we had right now." "But Grindelwald," Garrick spoke up in protest. Sal just shook his head. "If he truly has the Death Stick, it won't change a thing," he said, his voice strong and sure. "I will still fight him. Like Charles said, there's no way that he can be the Master of Death, not while bringing more death than balancing it. We should keep it at that." Charles nodded. The others exchanged a glance, but in the end, Sirius nodded as well. "I guess it doesn't matter," he said. "Deathstick or not. I won't back down now. Let him come. We will take him down, mythical weapon or not." "Damn true," Theseus agreed, grinning. Ulrich snorted and raised his soup as if he wanted to toast to someone. "Here, here," he exclaimed, and in the end, even Garrick Ollivander smiled, shook his head, and changed the topic of their discussion to the plans they had for the attack on Grindelwald's men in the morning. December 1970. "Garrick, step back, step back." Garrick Ollivander immediately listened to the voice of Charles Potter, who was next to Ulrich Moody, not too far from him. "Damn," Alaric cursed. While looking at the ward, Arcturus Nicholas Black was ringing with, "If that thing comes down uncontrolled, he'll be dead in an instant." Ollivander nodded darkly. "Damn Grindelwald and his damn tricks." Alaric cursed. It was then that Charles Potter's eyes hardened. "Garrick," he said, his voice booking no argument, "bring those hostages to safety. Alaric, defend them." Black, Sirius Black, who had been watching his brother's face with a deathly pale face, turned to look at Charles. "You'll have to stabilize this ward alone," Charles said, and gestured to the ward he and Sirius Black were currently stabilizing so that it didn't come crashing down on them and the imprisoned hostages like Grindelwald actually planned it to do. The pale man nodded. Charles took a deep breath, then released his part of the control of the wards to the older Black brother before hurrying to the younger one. He was just in time. A second later and he wouldn't have been able to help the other men anymore. But like it was, he was barely able to grasp the magic of the wards, and releasing the inexperienced ward helper that Arcturus had been forced to use when they discovered the second ward hidden within the first. The helper staggered back, and for a moment Charles had the feeling of getting crushed by a boulder. Then he bit his teeth and forced himself to fight through the power that had been released upon him. He normally was the ward breaker, not the power support, so carrying the power of the wards that Arcturus was dismantling was a new experience for him. But unlike Arcturus' former support, Charles at least knew what he had to do as a support to prevent the backlash coming back at the ward breaker and kill him. With his last strength, Charles grounded himself into the earth, taking the brunt of the power onto himself to prevent a backlash. Doing so, Charles knew, could have dire consequences as well. Too much power coursing through his body would weaken it and ensure that his heart would simply give out a lot faster than normal. Charles knew that his action could shorten his life down to 10 years or less. But he also knew that this was the only way to prevent Arcturus' immediate death. The moment the power ran through Charles into the earth, he could feel his strength leaving him. His clothing was charred by the power running through him. For a moment, Charles feared that the power would overwhelm him and attack his organs, but just before something like that could happen, the brunt of the power finally ran its course through his body and vanished into the earth. Arcturus staggered, as affected as Charles. 10 minutes later they were finally able to fully dissolve the ward. "You dunderhead," Sirius Black thundered the moment the ward was down and enveloped his brother into a hug. "Working with an untrained ward holder, are you suicidal?" The only answer from his brother was a dazed look, then Arcturus sagged to his knees, unconscious. Sirius Black stood in front of the doors of Gringotts, staring at the entrance in trepidation. He shuddered. It was disconcerting to be out in the open like that after hiding that long, but the most of the other people actually didn't pay attention to him, something that was surprising considering that it was the first time he had been out in the open since he had been declared innocent. Sirius took a deep, shuddering breath and closed his eyes for a second. "All right," he told himself. "All right, I can do that. I will do that." And yet it was like forcing himself to grow up even if he wasn't yet ready to lose the childhood he never had. Again, Sirius looked up the building, still hesitating to go in. Since he had freed himself from Azkaban just to be imprisoned in his childhood home again, he had resented Albus Dumbledore for his meddling and his demeanor. Yet, Sirius had never done anything to contradict the headmaster until now. Going into Gringotts would do that. Did Sirius want to go against the man who led the light side against Voldemort? If he had asked himself that question in the last war, he hadn't hesitated to say no. James would have never gone against the headmaster, and Sirius would have never gone against James. It was that thought that made Sirius stop in his thought process. His eyes widened when the thought actually registered within his mind. I wouldn't have gone against James, he whispered to himself. Against James. It had never been Dumbledore that had his loyalty, but always James. It was a stunning and utterly surprising thought, something that Sirius had never even registered in his own mind before. James? His eyes looked unfocused at the door. James was the one I followed. But that left the question who Sirius would follow now. The answer came to him the moment he wondered mentally about that. Harry, he said to himself. If I have to follow someone, I will follow Harry. And Harry had broken with Dumbledore, as disillusioned with the old man as Sirius himself felt. But Sirius also knew that there was no way that they had a chance against Dumbledore as simply Sirius and Harry. No, they needed more if they wanted to have a chance, if they wanted to break with Albus Dumbledore without simply being killed by Voldemort the moment they left Dumbledore's protection. We need some power ourselves, Sirius whispered. Harry is the head of Potter, but he can't stand alone. We need allies. Sirius's eyes narrowed. If he wanted to ensure that Harry could break free, it was Sirius who had to ensure that he could. I'm not a child anymore, Sirius admitted to himself, forcing himself to see the truth the first time since he had left Azkaban. I'm the adult. I should act like one. It was a hard-to-face truth. A truth Sirius actually didn't want to be true. And yet, here he was, admitting to himself for the first time that he might have acted more like a child than like the adult he was supposed to be, since he had fled Azkaban. I might have an excuse for the first year after my escape, Sirius said to himself. I was just out of Azkaban and still half insane from the Dementor exposure after all. But he had to admit to himself that neglecting Harry in his 4th year, especially after Harry had faced Voldemort, had been more than immature. Sirius had just continued with being immature since then. Maybe, Sirius mused darkly, it's time that I stop being an idiot, even if it meant to fake being more mature until he truly was. So Sirius took another deep breath and then stepped through the doors of Gringotts. It seemed that it was time that he'd face the responsibilities he had refused to face his entire life. Oddly enough, it had been the journal of his ancestor that had forced him to admit that maybe he had been too much of a child still, and that maybe it was time to take up the mantle of his ancestors and follow them and their example than continue like he had. 4 November 9. If you ever read this, my dear son, then I'm sorry that I died, but this was my decision. I am the head of Black, and I will never stand down and sit by while this monster is still alive. If it means my death, so be it. If it means to go against the Wizengamot, so be it. I am the head of Black, and I will do anything to ensure that I know that you stand by my side, currently, and for my sake of mind. I hope you'll survive this war. If you don't, I will forever hate myself for that. But I won't ever blame anyone but me. You are my son. You have my blood, and my stubbornness. I will regret your death, but I will understand that you fought for what you believed in. If you survive and I don't, then I hope you will live your life to the beliefs I instilled in you. I hope that you will follow your beliefs even without me at your side, and that you will keep true to them for the rest of your life. Stand strong, my son. Be who you ever wanted to be. And don't let anybody ever meddle in your life, even if everybody else believes he has the right idea. I love you, Archie. Sirius Phineas Black. Yes, Sirius Orion Black guessed that it was time to follow the example of his ancestors. Maybe it was finally time to stand up and follow the advice his ancestor had left for Sirius's grandfather. Maybe it was time that Sirius Orion Black finally followed his herd, and that meant that maybe he should finally be the man James and Lily had seen in him when they had named him godfather of their only son. Maybe it was time that Sirius finally stepped up and changed into the man he had wanted to be, the godfather he had longed to be for years now. Sirius stepped through the doors of Gringotts and walked up to one of the tellers. I am Sirius Orion Black, he said. I am here to inquire about the Lordship Ring of Black. The goblin looked at him coolly. Follow me, he said. You will have to confirm your identity before you can inquire about anything, wizard. Sirius inclined his head and followed. It was time to be the Lord of Black. It was time to step up and tell Dumbledore no. It was time to accept the alliance the Longbottoms had offered. It was finally time to live the life he should have years ago. The man Alastor Moody met was sitting at his desk, his arms folded in front of his chest. "Alastor," the old man greeted Moody. "Uncle Jerome," Moody replied softly. He hadn't talked with the man in years, but even now he couldn't stop the use of the title he had used even as a child. The man smiled softly at that. "It's nice to still be seen as family by you, Alastor," he said. "It has been a long time." "It has, Uncle Jerome," Moody replied, inclining his head. "I am sorry for that." The old man shook his head. "You don't have to, child," he replied. "You've been ensnared by a great man for quite some time, after all." It was the first time that Moody heard the hidden sarcasm in the other man's voice. Moody closed his eyes. "Tell me, Uncle," he asked, "do you think that I did something wrong following Albus Dumbledore?" The old man hesitated. Moody's eyes met the old man's, inquiry visible in them. "Will you turn around and leave me if I answer you?" the old man asked cautiously, and Moody closed his eyes in regret. "I won't, Uncle Jerome," he replied bitterly. "I might have been blinded in the past, and I might have if you had said something before, but I'm not blinded enough to not listen to you now." The old man stared at him coolly at that. "What changed your mind?" he asked. Moody shook his head tiredly. "Who, not what," he said, sighing. "Harry James Potter did. He had information about Dumbledore's actions at the time of the Grindelwald War. I need to know if the information I gained was right." The old man raised an eyebrow at that. "You refused to listen to me when I tried to tell you the tale of your father's fight when you were young," he remarked. Moody closed his eyes. "I didn't believe you," he said. "I thought you lied to me. It sounded so different to the things Albus Dumbledore told me when he visited my mother." The old man's eyes narrowed at that. "Of course it sounded different," Jerome exclaimed. "Albus Dumbledore has never had any idea what it means to fight in a war. He never fought, he hid until he couldn't hide anymore, and then he destroyed everything we worked for, just because he was blinded by his own greatness." Moody stared at the other man in surprise at that. "What are you talking about, Uncle?" he asked, confused. "Tell me, Alastor," the old man Jerome asked. "What do you think when I say Sirius Black?" Moody frowned. "The ex-convict of Azkaban?" he asked, now fully confused. The old man sighed. "No, Alastor," he said. "Sirius Black, the man who basically lost his life at Numengard." Moody frowned. The old man just shook his head tiredly. "No, Alastor," he replied. "I just gave you the name of the man who died to pull down the wards of Numengard. There's a reason why the heir of Black was named Sirius, exactly like there's a reason why the heir Secundus was named Regulus." Moody's frown deepened. There was nothing of that sort in the journal he had read. The journal stopped way before, and Moody had taken the only source he had for that event as truth. "I thought that the wards on Numengard weakened," he said, confused. Jerome's eyes narrowed. Moody frowned. "The current Sirius Black was following James Potter's lead," Jerome replied. "He was and is allied with the Potters, as far as magic is concerned, not with Dumbledore. If he would have allied himself with Dumbledore, he would have lost his family name long ago." Moody looked at the old man in surprise. The old man just smiled at him. "You will see," Jerome said. "The moment Sirius Black will take up his lordship, he will ally himself with the Potters and others, but not with Dumbledore. The thought to ally himself with Dumbledore will not even cross his mind. The current Sirius Black might see himself a rebel, but he's only following the lead of the true Blacks of long ago." Moody raised an eyebrow at that, and the old man elaborated, amused. "Nearly the whole Black family decided to rebel against the British ministry at the time of Grindelwald," Jerome explained, amused. "They left Britain to fight the war against Grindelwald even when the ministry refused to send people. They stood up to the whole nobility of wizarding Britain. At first they listened to their arguments, then they contacted their allies and decided to do the absolute opposite. The current Sirius Black's rebellion is nothing when you look at the whole thing compared to his grandfather's and great-grandfather's generation. Moody couldn't even object to that, the words just supported by the journal of Sirius Phineas Black. But if the Blacks fought in the war, why doesn't anybody know about that anymore? He asked, confused. A question he had wondered about since the day he had started to read Sirius Phineas Black's memories. If they were responsible for the lessening of the wards of Numengard, why is their sacrifice not remembered? The old man shook his head and sighed. Tell me, Alistair, he said instead of answering. What do you think if I say Newt Scamander? The magizoology expert? Moody asked. Exactly. Moody frowned. I can't remember him doing anything in the war, he said. The old man smiled tiredly. What do you think if I say Fremont Charles Potter? He asked instead of elaborating. In his youth and with the Blacks known as Charles or Charles Harry James, for the rest of the magical world known as Fremont. James Potter's father? Moody asked, frowning. The same, Jerome said. Moody's frown deepened. As far as I know, he was an unspeakable and had nothing to do with the Grindelwald War, he replied slowly. What about Garrick Ollivander? Moody's frown deepened even more. He's a wand maker. He was at Britain at that time, he replied, wondering why his uncle brought up all those names without explaining anything. His uncle just nodded and continued. And what do you think if I say Marius Black? He asked Moody. Moody stared at his uncle. The squib? He asked. Him? Jerome replied. Moody's brows furrowed. What had a squib to do with a wizarding war? He had never heard anything of a squib fighting against Grindelwald. He didn't think that Albus had ever. He stopped his thought process with a frown. Albus Dumbledore hadn't told him a lot of things, and it seemed that he was unaware of a lot of other things as well. But why would his uncle name a squib when talking about a magical war? Then his eyes widened when he thought it over. Mad Marius, he repeated in disbelief. The old man's mouth curled into the resemblance of a smile. Him, Jerome agreed, before asking, and what do you think if I say? The old man stopped with a frown. Ugh, well, I forgot his damn first name again. Say, Malfoy then, I guess. Albus said something about the Blacks and Malfoys believing that he was at fault for Grindelwald. Moody said slowly, I never heard the first name of the Lord Malfoy of back then. The old man shrugged. I fear that the most of us always forgot his first name. It is damn complicated and he hated it if we mangled it to Salazar, the most of us did, you know. There was amusement in the old man's voice when he confessed that, in the end we shortened it down to Salad, and left it at that. Moody frowned. It was then that he finally combined all the evidence he had accumulated and understood what his uncle was talking about. He was Sal's sanctuary, wasn't he? He asked. The old man smiled.
That he was.
Mad Marius, you named already, but the rest I named were important in the war as well, if you know them or not, the old man said. Important? How? Moody asked. There. Finally, he would gain the information he had come for. Finally, he would find out who had lied to him, Albus Dumbledore or Harry James Potter, his uncle. One Jérôme Delacour would have the evidence that he needed to finally understand what happened back then, and why Harry James Potter suddenly was that enraged with Albus Dumbledore. Every one of them had their own part in the war, Jérôme replied, shrugging. Like Mad Marius was our specialist, like Sal's sanctuary was our leader. Like Newt Scamander was part of the Dragon Division. Moody's eyebrow raised at that. Dragon Division. He guessed that that was a fitting place for a magizoologist. The old man nodded. Ukrainian Iron Belly, he answered, amused. In the first war against Grindelwald, he was on the Eastern Front. In the second, he was the head of the division. Then the old man shook his head. But that's not why I named them, he confessed, and Moody's eyebrows furrowed again. Why else did you name them? He wondered. I named them because they were the ones who worked with your father the closest, Jérôme replied. They were his bosses and his suppliers. They were his strategists, his backup plan, his extraction team. They were the people who worked with your father, who trusted your father, who believed in your father. Then a heavy gaze fixed on Alistair Moody. I noticed, Moody replied dryly. I am an aura. I am trained to notice things like that. The old man stared darkly at the opposite wall. There's a good reason for it, Alastair, he said. Let me tell you about it.